God, are you still there to help me? God, are you going to get me through this? All while somewhere in the back of our minds, we know that the salvation of God will get us through whatever we face in this life. As I've been thinking about this message, as I said, I've been working on this thing for, I guess, about 4 or 5 weeks now. Every time I thought I was going to preach it, the Lord just changed it. But there's a song that Sarah's mom sings that says He'll do it again. He'll do it again. Just take a look at where you are now and where you've been. Hasn't He always come through for you? He's the same now as then. I may not know how, and I may not know when, but He'll do it again. Church, this morning I want to remind us, He will do it again. He will be faithful again and again and again. When we're going through the troubles of this life, when we're facing the things that we have to face simply because we are still walking in this life, He will be faithful to come through for us again and again and again. Now, I've told you the past 2 weeks, I know at least, the message title that I had has been Divine Deliverance. And I can't think about that without thinking back to a youth camp that we had in Virginia. And the camp director felt led that that was the theme we needed to have. And I'd love to stand here this morning and tell you, I remember every message that was preached in that camp. But I can't remember a single message that was preached in that camp. I can't remember a class that was taught. I can't remember necessarily anything that was done except for I remember the theme, Divine Deliverance. Why do I remember that? Because in the hardest times of my life, I've had to go back to that theme and say, God, I need divine deliverance in this situation. I can't rely on myself. I can't rely on those around me. God, I need your deliverance to come in this situation. Church, today, we need God's deliverance to come in the things that we are facing. We don't need my answers. We don't need your answers. We need God's answers for what we're doing, for what we're facing, and what we're going through. The definition of the word divine is of or the form or like God. So divine means that it comes only from God. I cannot give you something divine. I can't give you a divine revelation. I can't give you divine healing. It has to come from God and God alone. Deliverance is the action of being rescued or set free. What we're saying when we say we need divine deliverance is to say that we need to be rescued or set free in a way that only God can do it. Not in a way that I can provide for you. Not in a way that this local church can provide for you, but in a way that only God can provide. Last week, I spoke a little bit about David and Goliath. And I cut the notes that I had or the thoughts that I'd been looking at real short in that. But as I looked at the account of David and Goliath, and I've preached it many, many times, one of the things that came back to me this time was the fact that David may have been the one to fight Goliath, but it wasn't David who overcame the giant. It wasn't David children of Israel. And I was actually reading a devotion a couple weeks ago that pointed something out that I have never thought about before. And that was the simple fact that many times we look at the account of David and we picture ourselves as being David, as going and fighting the enemy, as going and doing these things. But David is not a representation of us, but rather David was a representation of Christ because he overcame, he defeated the enemy. Church, we need to realize that I cannot defeat the enemy, but Christ has already overcame the enemy. And when we have that realization that David wasn't there to represent us, then it brings back to our mind again that what does represent us was the rest of the armies of Israel gathered around that day. They were trembling and sore afraid is what the Bible said. They were, in all honesty, they were worthless in that moment. They weren't doing anything. They weren't going forth. But they needed someone to come along and to deliver them. Church, today, what I want us to realize, what I want to get across to us is we desperately need someone to come along and deliver us in the day and hour we're living in. What I want us to realize today is that the divine deliverance that we need is not merely God using one of us to make a situation better. The divine deliverance we need is Jesus Himself coming on the scene and defeating the giant yet again in our lives. Church, I say that to say, for many years, we have relied on those that have come before us. We have relied on our spiritual giants that we have looked to as men of faith, men of good report. And they have done a great work. And I'm thankful for them, and this is not to take anything away from them or discredit them whatsoever. But we've entered into a time that we don't need to look to the pastor, that we don't need to look to the overseer for their help. They may be great men, but that's not where our help is going to come from. We don't need to merely see the situations get better. We need victory over them. We need to be able to move past the situations that we're facing, to go overcome the things that we're going through. And that's not going to come by some man making the situation better. It's only going to come when God comes and brings true deliverance from the situation. I do it all the time, but you all know I love to pick on Brother Hard. And I only do it because Brother Hard is someone that I have looked to for so many years, that has stood the test of time, that has been faithful over and over and over again. But Brother Hard, we've come to a time that I can't look to you and depend on you for your help. I need God's help. Church, we need God's help in this time. Just to give you a few more examples. In Exodus, Brother Art actually preached a fantastic message on this that we recorded this week at General Headquarters. And it should be coming out here before long. But in Exodus, we read, in Exodus the 14th chapter, and we're going to start at the 10th verse. And when Pharaoh drew nigh, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them, and they were sore afraid. And the children of Israel cried out unto the Lord. And they said unto Moses, because there were no graves in Egypt, hast thou taken us away to die in the wilderness? Wherefore hast thou dealt thus with us, to carry us forth out of Egypt? Is not this the word that we did tell thee in Egypt, saying, Let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it had been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. And Moses said unto the people, Fear ye not. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which He will show to you today. For the Egyptians whom ye have seen today, ye shall see them again no more forever. The Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace. Church, how many times have we been in the same situation that the Israelites were here coming out of Egypt? They looked at their leader and they said, What have you done to us? You let us out here to die. You should have just left us alone. At least we wouldn't be dead. We might be slaves, but we wouldn't be dead. I'm just going to be honest with you this morning. I've had that mentality before. I've had that thought of, why are we even doing what we're doing? You've led us out here so far, and now we're going to die in the midst of this dry and barren land. But what did Moses say to the children of Israel? He said, The Lord will fight for you. Church, today, let me tell you something. And I had no intention to take it this direction. Don't know why I'm saying this necessarily. But the leadership, it doesn't matter who they may be, of the church, of the country that we live in, of the world, will not be able to lead us to a point that God will not fight for us if we will be faithful to Him. He will go before us and He will fight for us. He will take the enemy, the battle that he needs, and He will be victorious in that battle. We have to hold on to God. We're not looking to a leader somewhere to lead us where we need to go. We're looking to God that we can find out what it is that He has for us in the day and hour that we're living in. But you see, the children of Israel here, they were backed up. We know this account. They came out of Egypt. They went through the wilderness. And now they were faced with the Red Sea in front of them. A vast sea of water that they would drown in. They knew they had no hope there. But behind them was the armies of Egypt coming against them, ready to kill them and slaughter them. So what was their option? They had no hope no matter which way they turned. The only hope that they had was that divine deliverance would come on the scene and begin to work. And what do we know happened? The Lord came down and spoke to Moses and said, If you will lift your staff, you will see the waters part and the children will walk across on dry land. Church, man cannot make that happen. It doesn't matter what we may try to do. I cannot separate water. I cannot push it back. And even if I could, I couldn't dry the land underneath it. I don't know if you've ever seen when the agriculture side of government will come in and drain a lake somewhere and take all the water out of that body of water. What's left is a giant mud pit. And it can go for months and never dry out. It just continually stays wet because there's so much water that is absorbed into the ground there. This sea had been there for years and years and years. There was water that had absorbed into the ground. But when God came on the scene, the land immediately dried up so they could walk across it. But God didn't stop there. God went on that when the armies of Egypt came behind them, He didn't just let the land get wet again and them get stuck in the midst of it. But the Bible says that He began to take the wheels off the chariots. And then when the children of Israel got across, the waves that were separating the water crashed down over top of them. What am I saying about all this? I'm saying it wasn't Moses that made the difference in that moment. It was God. God came on the scene and God made the difference for the children of Israel. Church, it's not going to be a man. It's not going to be a leader that makes a difference for us. It's going to be God that comes on the scene. We have to see God come and deliver us again. I can look through account after account. We can look at Daniel when he went to the lion's den. It is in the nature of a lion to eat when they are hungry. And it doesn't matter what they may come against. They will overcome and devour if it's meat. That's the way a lion was made. That's the way God designed them. But in the midst of that den of lions, the God came down and sent an angel that it would shut the mouth of those lions. It went against every natural response. But God came on the scene and God delivered again. We can look at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It is against everything, every part of science that we know that a man can walk around in the midst of a fiery furnace. But God came on the scene and God delivered them out of that so that they didn't even smell like smoke. Church, we can read of account after account after account after account in the Bible where God came on the scene. But let's even look outside of the Bible for a moment. I can give you an account of a country boy that grew up knowing what it was to be in church, but not really developing that relationship with God. That I went out and did my own thing. That I got hooked on some things that were not becoming of me, that were not of God. That I was out living my own life. But God came on the scene and God delivered me from those things. It was against science. It was against human reasoning. You see, when you've got an addiction, it's not something that man can do to break that addiction. But God has to come on the scene. Brother Art, I've read your book. You have much the same testimony that God came on the scene and delivered you. Brother Nick, I've talked to you enough. I know that God came on the scene and God delivered you out of the miry clay. And it doesn't matter if you have this grand and glorious testimony of how bad you were that God brought you out of. The fact that you are sitting here this morning as a child of God and saved means that God reached down and divinely delivered you out of the sin that you were living in. But too many times, we leave that behind us. We leave that deliverance that we read about in the Bible. We leave the deliverance that God has already brought to us behind us. And we say, but God, this situation is going to overcome me. It's going to be the death of me. And we begin to once again stand in the midst of, just like the armies of Israel did against Goliath, sore afraid and good for nothing. But church, we need divine deliverance today as much as we ever have before. As much as we did the day we got saved, we need divine deliverance today just as much. It's not a take it one time and forget it and never look back. But it is a day by day by day thing that we've got to go back to and say, God, I need you to come on the scene only as you can. Not what man can do, but God, what you can do. And I need you to intervene and come and deliver me again. Brother Nick read the scriptures in John the 3rd chapter this morning, opening up. John the 3rd chapter, starting at the 14th verse, the Bible said, and as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have eternal life. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in Him should not perish, but have everlasting life. For God sent not His Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through Him might be saved. Church, yet again, we see the account of divine deliverance that came through. When we could do nothing to earn heaven. When we did everything to deserve hell, God sent forth His Son to come on the scene where no man could, no animal could take that place, but He sacrificed Himself so that we could be free. It is by very definition divine deliverance at its finest. But the 14th verse gives us some valuable instruction. It says, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness. Now I want to remind you, before they went in the wilderness, Moses went before the Pharaoh. And standing there, he threw his staff down. And God came and changed that staff into a serpent. And when Moses reached down and picked that serpent back up, it became a staff yet again. So when the Bible here says that Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, Moses lifted up that staff in the wilderness, and what happened? The sea separated. Divine deliverance came in that moment. Even so must the Son of Man be lifted up. Church, today, I want you to understand that if we're going to see this divine deliverance, we can get in the altars and we can cry and we can weep and we can beg God all we want, but it's not going to come until we begin to lift up the Son of God back on His throne where He belongs. That we begin to exalt and worship Him the way that He deserves to be worshiped here today. If you need deliverance in your life, if you're going through a battle and you don't understand what you're going through and you don't see the light at the end of the tunnel anymore, you begin to worship God. You begin to lift up the Son of God and what He's already done for us. You begin to thank Him for those things. And in that instant, deliverance will begin to come and work in your life. How do I know? Because I've been there in the midst of that situation over and over and over again where I said, God, I have no hope left. I don't know which way to turn. I don't see the answers ahead of me. And all of a sudden the Lord will just move on me. Now, I'm not saying that it happened overnight. I'm just going to be honest with you. It took sometimes weeks. It took sometimes months of going through that valley of feeling like I was just torn apart and I didn't know which way to go and I couldn't feel the presence of God. But all of a sudden something would come over me, whether it was somebody that preached a message, whether it was the Spirit of God Himself that just came and whispered in my ear, begin to worship. And I'd begin to pour my heart out to God and worship Him with everything I had and lift Him back up. And in that moment, all those things that I had been dealing with, they begin to dissolve away, Brother Nick. They begin to get less of what I cared about because my worship was on what mattered and divine deliverance came on the scene. Stand with me if you would. Before the assembly, I made the statement over and over and over again. We desperately need God in this assembly. Anybody remember me making that statement? Well, guess what? I came out of the assembly, and as soon as the assembly was over, I found myself talking to somebody, and I looked at them and I made the statement, we desperately need God. Well, what are you getting at, critter? What I'm getting at is I don't care if the assembly is tomorrow. I don't care what's coming up tomorrow. I don't care what we're doing, what situation we're in, what moment we're in. Guess what? The reality of it is we desperately need God. Yes, we do. With no other definite or definers put around it. We desperately need God. Here in this local church, we desperately need God. In my personal life, I desperately need God. Why? Because I can't do it on my own. Guess what? You can't do it on your own either. It can't happen. It's not feasible for us to do it on our own. We desperately need God. So what does that lead us back to? It leads us back to we've got to have divine deliverance. Church, this morning, I want us to find a place to pray. And I want us to take a few moments here today. And I want us to begin to worship the Lord. I know you're facing things. I know you're going through things. But let's begin to worship the Lord, knowing that when we will lift Him up, His delivering power will begin to come down to us. Knowing that the situations we faced will have to cower when His divine deliverance comes on the scene and begins to work on our behalf. So church, I want to ask you here today, let's find a place to pray and let's call on the name of the Lord.